struggle sometimes with the idea of, of love, and how to, it's kind of that old song, looking for love in all the wrong places, you know, and getting like shot down. And, again, those expectations of, that used to be devastating to me, just like totally floor me when a relationship would break apart. I'd be like just sulking. Um, and then realizing that, and we kind of talked about it in the earlier, you were giving us some good insights on the earlier meeting about it's just the beginning, because I was so immature with those relationships in the past. Now I want to connect, even when I make false steps, so to speak. I don't want to go back into, because that's what led to my drinking and drugging. It's just like I didn't want to deal with that. Now it's like, okay, let me take a step back. I get up, I brush myself off, and then I get back
Yeah.
in to learn, what, something you said when you were doing your introduction, the toxic emotional dependencies, you know, and that was what my family was too. So, to try to deal with that, dealing with a lot here. So
You are.
emphasize, and I think with, if you really read Bill's letter, he was flummoxed too. I mean, some of the things he used, like, was it social calculus or something like that.
Oh
Uh,
yeah, yeah, yeah.
the whole letter, if you read it, you can, I mean, you could spend a long time. I've done it with a few friends where we just take it apart, like sentence by sentence almost. It's got a lot in it, and I really believe this is what's going to make AA better for us going forward, and all the recoveries really is. And I want to be a cheerleader for it in my recovery, to model it to other people, to give them hope and understanding that they can do this.
Yeah.
Because I don't think we talk about that enough in recovery. That, it's important to help people get to that point, because there's a lot of broken people
Yeah.
that really need some cheering, even when we make mistakes. So,
Especially when we make mistakes.
especially, yes.
Especially when we make mistakes, because I think I have a tendency, and I've seen it in a lot of people, is to hold myself to such a high standard that there's not a lot of room for what I would call growth.
Yeah,
And if there's no room for growth, how can I mature? How can I emotionally mature? Because maturity is about learning from our experience. That's the, sine qua non, if you will, of maturity, is the ability to learn from our experience and from, what we're doing, and especially when we make mistakes.
I love your line when you say, I've made mistakes, but I'm not a mistake.
It's a great line. I wish
I've
I,
been borrowing it, by the way. So I
it's,
think
it's not mine. I've heard it in my journey too from other people. I'm not so sure who came up with it. Maybe it was Ernie Larson, but it's so true. See, I think what happens with um, our development, because I've really been focusing on how we're stuck, right, in our development. We're stuck at a certain stage of development where we grab on to certain characteristics of who we are as though that is what defines us. And I think, see, that's what the false self does. It says these are things are important, so you must be this way to be okay. So if I have that trait, or if I've developed that trait, or if I've deluded myself into thinking I've that, I grab onto that and I hold on to that. That's like it's a life preserver. You're not going to take that out of my hand. Nobody's going to take that from me. I need it. I got a death grip on it, right? Kind of a thing. So this idea about I make mistakes, there's no room for that in the false self. The false self says you must be this way to be okay. See, that's where those perfectionist dreams and specifications come from. That false self is a black and white absolute world. So to make a mistake and to be able to say, hey, I've made a mistake. Let me see what I can learn from this. That is golden, because that keeps us maturing. That keeps us as in the game, so to speak. But as soon as I start to feel like I am a mistake, and that somehow I identify that that is who determines who I am, I'm going to resist that completely. And hence, I'm going to contribute to my impasse and my stuckness, if you will, in my emotional development, which we've all done. I mean, we've all done it. I've done it. I still do it. You know, we all do this. And the big important thing that I'm going to emphasize tonight when I talk about step 10 is awareness is so important. Being aware of what we're doing and the impact we're having on ourselves and on our life becomes so critical to developing emotional and achieving emotional sobriety. So thanks, Luke. It's always great to see you. So we've talked about that it is so important to think of what we're doing in terms of the achievement of emotional sobriety is we're really doing a second pass through the steps. Ernie Larson talked about the importance of taking a second first step. He talked about the first step was this desperation step. It was to help, break the bonds of our addiction. And and then we work the rest of the steps to support our recovery. Well, the achievement of emotional sobriety, in my opinion, is achieved by really doing a second pass through all the steps, but this time from the perspective of looking at your powerlessness over your emotional dependence and what it's done in your life. So as we do that, as we take this second pass through the 12 steps, especially tonight, we're going to be focusing on steps 1 to 9 as going into step 10, that it really is like putting on a new pair of glasses, because we're even going to look at some of the steps and what they're doing in a different way. And we've been articulating that and talking about that for many, many weeks. But let me just review the impact of those first 9 steps, right? And we will do that in a second. But we're talking about step 10 today, which is continue to take personal inventory. And when we were wrong, promptly admitted it. This, Herb Kagan likes to call this the step of emotional sobriety. I think it's the step that starts to integrate all that we've learned in the first 9 steps to achieve emotional sobriety. But it is definitely dependent on the quality of the work we've done before we get to step 10. Because you will not be able to take step 10 and to practice step 10 in your life if you've in any way cheated yourself in working the first 9 steps. Because you will not have the humility it takes to perform this act. To be able to look at yourself and to take an inventory and get really honest with yourself. And when you are wrong, to promptly admit it takes a lot of humility, takes a huge commitment to yourself. And in one way, the way I like to say it all the time, only the best in us can see the worst in us. And the best in us is the emotional sobriety. And when we're seeing the worst in us, we're seeing how we put our demands on other people, how we expect other people to meet our needs, regardless of how unreasonable they are, etc., etc., etc. But we'll talk about that more. But let's look at step 10 is integrating what we have learned in steps 1 through 9. Step 10 and I believe 11 and 12 are steps that are integrating, and it's like further reinforcing a foundation that's going to help us achieve emotional sobriety. So the way I think of it is this step requires us to use all of what we have learned in steps 1 through 9 to have a healthier relationship. In fact, that's how Ernie Larson describes stage 2 recovery. It's about learning how to have a loving and healthy relationship. And it's so true what the way Bill said of it is none of us know what a true partnership really looks like. You can't have a true partnership when you're making everything about me. Or I can't, I'll say it that way, I'll keep it more personal. I can't have a true partnership when it is all about me, me. Because when I make it all about me, I lose the ability to have empathy for you. Because in losing that perspective, I will demand that you show empathy for me without holding myself to the same standard. We're also really seeing that recovery cannot just be a good idea. It needs to be experienced. That's what steps 8 and 9 were all about, is go out and live your life. Take what you're learning and go make connection, make contact with people, but in a different way, not a way that's so driven by our false pride or our false self or our ego, whatever you want to call it, but that's driven by our desire to strive for the best possible attitude and behavior we can bring to our life. So we're taking the cart, not and taking it and putting it behind the horse, not putting it in front of the horse. We're reversing what we've all done. The other thing that we've learned up in the first 2 steps is that we're both trying to understand what is causing me to behave the way I am, what the structure and function is of my behavior. But it's also telling me that if you want to make changes, you've got to get into action. It's not all about just sitting there and talking about what you're doing or gonna do, but it's doing what you're talking about. And that's, I think, one of the things that's made it such a unique program and is effective is that it combines both behavioral and psychological information. So what we've learned in these first 9 steps is that change is paradoxical, is that we change by owning what or who we are and what we are doing. This is a prerequisite for change. Another way of looking at it is acceptance. Acceptance is a prerequisite to change. What we've learned is that we've become disenchanted or disillusioned with our emotional dependence, and this opens up the possibility of discovering some new ways of functioning in relationships that are much less based on emotional dependency. We've also learned that living consciousness is a key, or living consciously is a key to optimal living. This living consciously includes an awareness of myself, but also on you. So my awareness of you allows me to operate with empathy. We cannot have a healthy relationship without empathy existing for both of us. We've learned that it's important to have faith and hope that there's another possibility, that I'm not just going to continue to be functioning like this, or that I'm going to be able to find a way to have that experience, that freedom that is so important to us. We've learned that taking responsibility for how we create our existence and produce our tension and distress, even how we produce our symptoms, is critical, because that's self-empowering. We're not blaming ourselves. We're just saying, hey, this is what I've done. This is who I am. This is what I'm creating. We've learned that developing an authentic relationship, right, is very important to our ongoing development and maturation. And going back to the one I skipped, is that making a commitment to discover new possibilities is what happens in our 3rd step. So we're committed to this. And now we get an opportunity to be authentic, to develop an authentic relationship. We become aware in step 6 and 7 of our resistance to change and starting to get in touch with what function, that behavior, that shortcoming had in terms of how we show up in our relationships. We're learning the value of learning to ask for help, the importance of finishing unfinished business. We take radical responsibility for how we have harmed others. As a psychologist, as a clinical psychology, I would go to present this at professional conferences. for psychologists only, not psychologists in recovery, but just psychologists. And the common remark was after person was, aren't you concerned that people are abdicating their responsibility by saying they have a disease? And that just shows their ignorance because I believe that we become so responsible. We end up functioning so much better than before, than what's called our pre-morbid level of functioning. We're realizing as we've worked the steps, and especially steps 8 and 9, the importance of empathy in a healthy relationship. And we've started to cultivate that to some degree. And that we've learned that curiosity is essential to a better life. Now, this is a case where curiosity saved the cat rather than killed it, right? Doesn't kill the cat in this case, it really saves it. I believe that this step prunes expectations, tries to keep us right-sized, right? So it helps us maintain our relationship with our truer spiritual self. It helps guard against the return to false pride. We know that humility is a foundation for our spiritual growth and our spiritual life. In fact, this step is important in the restoration of trust in our relationships because, well, especially with those we love, because they see that we are taking responsibility to change ourselves rather than demanding that other people change. And we're learning what a true partnership is really about. Wow. If we could plug in all those skills into our life, wouldn't that be phenomenal? And that's, I think, what this is about creating an atmosphere of learning. So one of the things that we also learn is that trouble in a relationship doesn't mean something's wrong. It's an opportunity, right, to grow ourselves, to fill that hole, to take responsibility, to become what we can be. It's very powerful. Trouble in a relationship means something's right, is that the relationships do naturally cause a lot of problems. And once again, I see every one of those challenges, I would call them, as an opportunity to develop a more intimate relationship with that person or that experience. So when we say in relationships, trouble in a relationship means something's right, they're designed to be people growers. Relationships grow people. So I hope by putting this into some perspective, you can come to appreciate the importance of this step in emotional sobriety. If not, you know, you know, I was thinking about it as a punching bag, you're going to hit the bag and it's going to hit you back. I mean, and it's going to keep hitting you back until you learn how to really move with it and dance with your experience. And that's what emotional sobriety is about. This is what Brandon says. He says, no one can always give us what we want. No one can always respond to us the way we would like them to. And definitely not just at the right moment we'd like. No one else exists for the satisfaction of our needs or our desires. And if we attempt to manipulate someone into either playing this role by playing for their sympathy or by playing for guilt, all we succeed in doing at the end is to stimulate resentment, regardless of whether or not our partner is maneuvered into complying with our immediate request. He goes on to say this. He says, autonomous individuals, and that's what we're striving to achieve. See, Bill saw that this was the path to emotional freedom. He says, autonomous individuals understand that other individuals do not exist merely to satisfy their needs. They have accepted the fact that no matter how much love and caring exists between people, we are each of us, in the ultimate sense, responsible for ourselves. That's at the heart of emotional sobriety with Dr. Brandon. It's also at the heart of true, authentic self-esteem. They parallel each other so much. The way I said it is that step nine helped us regain our integrity and trust. We learned how to honor and genuinely respect the dignity of another human being. We're growing up. This much is clear if we have come this far. And step 10 assures that we will continue to be humble and take responsibility for when we are wrong. With a persistent effort to practice this important step, we increase our self-esteem, our trustworthiness, and we lay another brick in the foundation for our emotional sobriety. This step is an integration of all we've learned in the first 9 steps. Bill says this, it's a spiritual axiom that every time we are disturbed, no matter what the cause, there's something wrong with us. There's something wrong with us. A lot of times, what's wrong with me in this situation when I get upset is I fail to have empathy for the other person. That's always going to cause trouble. When I fail to have the ability to put myself in my partner's shoes or in anybody's shoes I'm interacting with, then I can really miss that person. I can do damage to that relationship. He goes on to say this, that a spot check inventory, because he really talks about two different kinds of inventories in this step. He says a spot check inventory taken in the midst of such disturbance can be of great value and help, or great help in quieting stormy emotions. Yeah, he really understood the importance of this, didn't he? That if we can pause for a while, that instead of our reaction being so supported by our emotional dependence, we can now let the best of us, do the talking and speaking for the rest of us. The quick inventory is aimed at our daily ups and downs, especially when there were people or new events that throw us off balance and tempt us to make mistakes. Okay. He goes on, further states in step 10, in all these situations, we need self-restraint, an honest analysis of what is involved, a willingness to admit when the fault is ours, and an equal willingness to forgive when the fault is elsewhere. We need not be discouraged when we fall into the error of our old ways, for these disciplines are not easy. We shall look for progress, not for perfection. Yeah. Boy, Bill really, really nailed this when he was talking about it. See, this is how we integrate because all that we've done up to this point is to make us be able to step up and be completely accountable for our life. Now, it's very important to think about this as an integration, an experience of integration. Because if you don't integrate what you've learned, you're never going to be able to achieve emotional sobriety. You see, it can't just be a good idea. It can't just be that, that sounds right. It has to be something I try on. I plug into my life. And I see and I experience, then I can experience what the effect of that is. So with that being said, let me open up the room for my discussants and have them come in and see what they'd like to say tonight. Tom, good evening. You're
Good
muted.
evening.
There's the other Tom. He's not muted.
Yeah, and Julia's here.
Okay, there she is. Hi, Julia.
Hi, I finally made it in.
Fantastic.
Lack of Wi-Fi, that's my problem.
Mm-hmm.
Like a power.
Yeah.
Oh, that's right. Power. No, no, not Wi-Fi. Okay.
Well, that's your world, Tom. And for you, it probably comes definitely lack of Wi-Fi. Okay, well, let's open up the discussion on 10, and then we'll be able to move to 11 next week.
So
Well, I'll just go ahead. You want to go?
I just had one quick thing, and then I'll probably circle back. What is you used the word disenchanted, or just we become disenchanted with our emotional dependence. And I love playing with words. I think, Tom and I are kindred spirits in that. If I'm disenchanted or become just disenchanted, that means at some point I was enchanted, right? I was like enthralled, or I was, under the spell of my emotional dependencies, because they were a great distraction, right? They took the focus off of myself. I could, blame my unhappiness on outside circumstances, and it filled a purpose, right? But at some point, the the gloss wore off, and I realized that it was an impediment to being truly free and happy, and that's where the work starts kicking in. And so that word stuck out to me tonight.
If you became disemboweled, then that means at one point you were boweled.
That's right.
Just trying to help out here.
Well, the way that I think of it, and why I use that word, Tom,
Mhm.
and I'm glad you picked it up in the way you did. See, I think the enchantment we had was part of the hypnosis.
Yeah.
Is, Gurdjieff talks about how we are all hypnotized and walking around in this trance, believing we're awake when we're really asleep, right? He likes to say we're dreaming we're awake when we're really asleep. And I think it's true, because if you don't step up, or at some point, if you don't have this moment of clarity,
Mm.
and you see that, my God, I am living in this trance. I'm functioning with all the ideas that have been given to me that I've also adopted as my own, but I've never critically examined them and looked at them. Is this who I am? Is this who I really want to be? Does this what I really truly believe? Does this feel good for me? Do I feel good about who I am? See, these kinds of questions always escaped us because we bought the idea that I'd be okay if. Or I love what the
And
other
if
side of that coin, right?
I was going to say, and if never comes.
If never comes, maybe it comes in the beginning of a relationship, you fall in love and you think this is it. Oh my God, I found the love of my life. And then you realize, wait a minute, and that's where we become disillusioned in a relationship, because it's not going to be perfect. And if we don't know how to take the trouble that we're experiencing and convert it into connection and into deepening the intimacy between us, then we are going to continue to demand that people conform to our unreasonable expectations, because we don't have confidence that we can deal with things if they don't go our way. We're just going to throw a fit, get offended by reality, as we say, get pissed off at. I like that one. I'm going to get pissed off at reality. My God, reality, you shouldn't be like this. I mean, what's that about? Talk about playing God. I want reality to be what I want it to be, not what it is, because then it's going to expose me, how immature I am, how much work I've got to do to grow up.
I think we pissed off Tom.
Tom fell asleep. No,
He didn't like the reality of the
no, I didn't.
conversation.
No, I'm here.
Good seeing. Julie, what do you?
Well, I was just thinking I've been traveling recently, and this has been a really unique opportunity for me to I've had a sabbatical from work, and got to step out of my regular life, sort of my day to day, spend 2 days, day after day with my best friend that I've known for over 30 years. Um, and go back to my mother's hometown and leave her ashes and see my family. And in the midst of that, a lot of things came up for me. Partially, I think, because I was taken out of the distraction of my day to day. Um, and I had there was a lot of grief that came up and some realizations about how I'm living. That I want to address, and I would have never seen those. Um, I realized that I have a really hard time slowing down and enjoying things. Um, and I can bring a very anxious energy to my tasks and sort of try to, you know, just get through one thing and then go to the next thing and go to the next thing and go to the next thing. And I'm like constantly sort of busy. Um, And I do take time to reflect in the morning. But I'm sort of still processing all of this. And the beautiful thing about what this work is teaching me is that I get to look at that, um, and see, is that something I want to continue doing? And I believe that it is possible to make changes slowly, incrementally, but to work with that. Um, and the other thing that was kind of interesting was, this woman, Margaret, and I know each other really well. But there was a little bit of that, you spend 24 hours a day, 7 days a week with somebody for 2 weeks. And it's been a while since we've done that. And differences came up. And it was very cool to see how we handled them, as grown women. There were definitely times she was like, I need to take a break. I'm really upset. You know, you're going too fast. And then we'd come back and talk about it and say she's not in a program, but somehow she has grown up without a program. So, and does a lot of these things intuitively. And I really admire that and said, like, this is what came up for me. This is what I need from you. Um, and that's really cool because, back when we were teenagers, we just get really mad and then, not ever talk about it. So there has been growth.
Yeah. Yeah. I appreciate you sharing your experience.
The one thing I identify with, Julie, is the busyness, right? And I go back to something Alan said is like there's only two reasons to do something: you want to or you don't want to, right? Is that the right way
Yeah.
to phrase that? And so like I just got a high motor, and I'll in a few minutes when we're hang up this, I'm gonna go do the dishes, right? And my wife will go, leave them for our daughter, right? And I'll be like, but I like doing the dishes. The doing dishes is my love language, right? It's like it's I can just be with the soap and the water and the dishwasher and and scrub the pans and all that stuff. And um, but but I got to a point where I do it because I want to do it versus I feel like I have to do it, then resent them for not doing it the way I want them to do it. At the time I want them to do it. But until again this disenchantment piece comes up, until the waking up started happening of, okay, why am I doing this? Why am I staying so busy? Is it because I don't want to stop and look, or is it just because I like doing, and I want to do it?
Mhm. Thanks, Tom. Yeah, and I'm very clear that there's nothing in my life, like my life is full with things that I love and that I've chosen to be there. Even things that maybe I don't enjoy every moment that I'm doing them, but I've chosen to bring those activities into my life. But I think there's still room to mix things up a little bit and to slow down.
Somebody asked a question in the chat that I think would be worthy of addressing. It says, how about if I don't meet someone else's reality and desires
Hmm.
and their wants? How do I deal with not meeting the other's expectations in a differentiated way? It's such a good question because that that's the other side of the coin, right? That, and we talk about there's always two sides to this coin, always two sides to the coin, right? People not meeting my expectations, and what happens when I don't meet their expectations. Both of those are opportunities to see where you're at in terms of your maturity. So how do we communicate? Like if I disappoint you, let's say it's something's going on between Tom and I and disappoint him in some way. Um, I didn't laugh at one of his jokes deeply enough, let's say. Um,
Shit.
see, and he gets upset
David.
with me about it and starts to call me a stick in the mud, right? And other pejorative terms that only an English major could come up with,
That's
right?
right. That's right.
And to disembowel me and because I did not do what he wanted me to do, right?
Mhm.
So how do I handle that? Well, my first response in disappointing someone, I feel it creates a crisis in me. I hate disappointing people I love and care about. It brings up a lot of anxiety in me. I feel like I'm not going to be loved, that they're not going to be interested in me anymore, that I'm going to be abandoned.
Mhm.
That, I mean, it becomes catastrophic for me. And in emotional sobriety, I'm learning to share that. God, I can see that you're really disappointed in me, and that really creates a hardship for me. Because I don't want to disappoint you, but yet I don't want to lose my integrity. And so I have a challenge here about how to please you and meet your needs and not get lost in that pleasing you. So I'm trying to be real with you, and I can see that when I was that way, it bothered you a lot, and I guess I want to know more about how it bothered you. See, it's something where, you've heard me say this before, and I think Tom and I need to come up with a bunch of examples because, we're working on a couple different workshops. One is going to be these nutshell wisdoms of emotional sobriety. We wanted to start to do that, and hopefully we'll launch one before the end of this year, Tom. I'm hoping that we're going to do. But
Good.
another one we're going to be is how do you add more self when there's tension in a relationship? I'll tell you that if there's nothing else we can achieve this year, I'm hoping that towards the end of this year we can spend a lot of time talking about that because that is the essence. Now, in one way, I think Bill caught that when he brought step 10 into the program, right, into the process. Because step 10 is adding more of yourself, adding more of a wise, healthy self to a relationship, a mature self. I'm going to admit when I'm wrong, right? And we continue to take personal inventory. So first of all, I'm going to have a daily practice of self-reflection and to check myself and to see if I did something I don't feel good about today. And because I want to take responsibility for myself now and how I show up, if I was wrong, I want to admit it. I also want to learn from it. I want to gather as much information I can in terms of what happened that I needed to make this amends about. Did I react to what I thought was, a slight? Did I have an expectation on how a person was supposed to behave and I got mad when they didn't meet that expectation? We go back to what he said when I'm disturbed, there's something off with me. It's not just the other person. There's something going on my end. So I think this is a very important step in terms of achievement of emotional sobriety because we're learning to add more self when there's trouble.
Well, and it's interesting you say that because I think of this as the step of incarnation
Yeah.
and what I wrote here was we're incarnating our upgraded self using more
There.
technical terms. It's like here's a new improved me coming into that, and I think that's and I and I think like what you said about 10, 11, and 12, that's, we're emerging at that point, coming back into the world, with this. And and I love what you said about, and the way you approached it today in terms of bringing all of, the steps are not individual, independent of each other. They're working together, and in a couple of different ways. One in the way that you describe it a lot of times, that one leads to the other, but the other one is always the one I talk about a lot, which is it's not so much a step as it's a tool. It's because it's always been fascinating to me when people go to rehab and they go like, well, I worked my steps, and you go, oh, well, aren't you glad you got that over with? It's like that's what we do. What do we do? We get introduced to them. And what you said about just wanting to do better, and I realized that well, I didn't even think about this, but the language I tend to use with that is just refer to it as step practice. It's like when you have a step practice, basically, first of all, that's based on any practice like that needs to be based on us being as present as we can in the present moment. So it's not about necessarily striving to be something else or to go, but ironically or magically or something, if I practice day in and day out, and I continue to come back to that practice, what I will, without doing anything to strive for it, I will achieve mastery of lots of different, and not just, there isn't one mastery over this. There's mastery of all this stuff. And the other note I made is that I had this great image in my head that just, because I was just entertaining myself as we went along, is like each step is a juggling ball, so you get two of them. That's pretty easy to do. Okay, here comes three, and then pretty soon we're doing 10 balls. It's like, it's a lot. It's a lot to pay attention to, and the only way we're going to make that a way of life is by doing what we're doing, which is to have that step practice where this stuff really does become second nature to us. It's that unconscious competence, and that only comes from repetition and practice. So
Right on.
yeah, I like this tonight, yeah, and I like the idea of us talking more about the adding more self, because it's such an important thing, and it's in the language of it it brings questions. What is that? How do you do that?
It's a frequent question that we get from the book study or workshops. Yeah.
Right. Do I just need to eat more ice cream? It's like that'll help.
Maybe
There'll be more. There will be more of me.
What Dr. Snarch used to say: "Eat a pint, though, not a whole gallon."
Oh, good. I do good. Yeah.
And in a way, at first glance, it looks like it goes against the principles of recovering spirituality. It's like, I'm supposed to be selfless. What do you mean you want me to add more?
Right.
Well, that's why we're going to have to spend some time talking about this, and we'll do that. That'll be our next focus after we're done with the steps.